Good morning. The hearing will come to order. The Committee on Armed Services has convened this hearing to consider the pending nomination of Mr. Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. And at this point, in light of the continued suffering and death in and around Los Angeles, California, I'm going to ask my colleagues and those in the audience to observe a moment of silence. Amen. Thank you. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my good friend, Ranking Member Jack Reed in this Congress. I want to thank Senator the pending nomination of Mr. Pete Hegseth to be Secretary of Defense. And at this point, in light of the continued suffering and death, I'm going to ask my colleagues and those in the audience to observe a moment of silence. Amen. Thank you. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my good friend, Ranking Member Jack Reed. This is my first opportunity to chair this committee in this Congress. I want to thank Senator Reed. Under his chairmanship, he proved time after time that he cares deeply about national security and about the United States of America, and particularly the men and women who wear the uniform and stand watch both here and around the world to protect the United States. Senator Reed, I want to thank you for the many courtesies that you have extended to me in the past, and I look forward to working with you again in a bipartisan fashion this Congress. It's also appropriate to recognize and welcome 3 senators attending their very first Senate Armed Service Committee hearing as members. Senator Banks of Indiana, Senator Sheehy of Montana, and Senator Slotkin of Michigan. We are excited to have you as committee colleagues and look forward to many important contributions from each of you. And Senator Slotkin, as I look down at the end of the dais there, it seems that only a week or two ago I was sitting in that very chair being recognized by the chairman of the committee, the distinguished senator from Michigan. So time flies. Now, let me say this. We had a very appropriate expression of approval by the members of the members of the audience as our nominee and his family. The distinguished ranking member and I sincerely hope that that is the last signal of approval or disapproval in today's hearing. People of the public are here. They're welcome to observe today's hearing, and Senator Reed and I agree, though, that no disruptions will be allowed. Audience members may not verbally or physically distract from the hearing, to include shouting, standing. About this, aren't we, Mr. Reed? And absolutely, sir. Those who do so will be immediately escorted from the room. Again, welcome to the witnesses, to his friends, and to interested members of the public. If confirmed, Mr. Pete Hegseth would assume the role in a moment of consequence. The United States faces the most dangerous security environment since World War II. We're witnessing the explosive growth and reach of China's hard power. We're also observing the emergence of an axis of aggressors. That coalition is characterized by broadening and deepening military cooperation among the dictatorships ruling China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Terrorism remains a threat as Israel wages war against Hamas and Hezbollah, and as the Assad regime collapses in Syria. America has entered a window of maximum danger, and the department needs energetic and focused civilian leadership. Those values begin at the top with the Secretary of Defense. Many of my distinguished colleagues have served in a significant tenure on this committee, and our meetings are fairly long. We should reflect over previous secretaries of defense and their hearings and ask ourselves a simple question. Has the civilian leadership of the Pentagon under the administration of both parties proven up to the challenge? Often the answer has been no. The civilian leadership has not built the Department of Defense to meet the moment. And this is our moment to correct that. A few examples illustrate how leaders in the past have fallen short. Most of the department's signature programs run years behind schedule and billions of dollars over cost. Vital initiatives have suffered, such as the F-35, the new Sentinel ICBM, and the Navy's shipbuilding program, including the Constellation-class frigate. The Department of Defense desperately needs civilian leaders who listen to the advice of combatant commanders, many of whom would benefit from innovative systems. Yet a risk-averse DoD culture has kept too many promising technologies on the wrong side of the so-called valley of death. That tenuous period between experimental prototypes and production contracts. Defense companies backed by venture capital receive less than 1% of defense contracts. As we all know, the Pentagon still cannot even pass an audit. The department must simplify and streamline its bureaucracy so it can respond to innovation. Staffs have ballooned. Organizations are top-heavy. Civilian leaders have promised time and again to slim down the bureaucracy, and perhaps genuinely hoped to. Every day, men and women in uniform make tremendous contributions to U.S. security. They and the American people deserve a Pentagon that does the same. Today's Department of Defense is no longer prepared for great power competition. It is not a national defense institution ready to achieve and sustain technological supremacy across the range of operations. Admittedly, this nomination is unconventional. The nominee is unconventional, just like that New York developer who rode down the escalator in 2015 to announce his candidacy for president. That may be what makes Mr. Hegseth an excellent choice to improve this unacceptable status quo that I just described. He is a decorated post-9/11 combat veteran. Shake up the bureaucracy. He will focus relentlessly on the warfighter and the military's core missions, deterring wars and winning the ones we must fight. He will bring a swift end to corrosive distractions, such as the acknowledge and live with the systemic problems I have mentioned earlier in acquisition, accountability, technology transition, and organizational civil service reform. Mr. Hegseth will actually move to fix these issues decisively. In short, I'm confident that the job done. The Secretary of Defense is an incredibly important position, but the Secretary's span of control is limited. The Pentagon is vast with 3 million plus personnel, uniformed civilian and contractor. A successful secretary understands that steering the ship means focusing his attention on strategic level priorities. The secretary must be supported with exceptional subordinates who will run the day-to-day affairs of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the military services, and the other DoD components. I'm also confident that as an infantryman, Mr. Hegseth understands the military principle of commander's intent. Communicate the clear objective, empower subordinates to use initiative and judgment, and hold everybody accountable. We must not underestimate the importance of having a top-shelf communicator as Secretary of Defense. Other than the President, no official plays a larger role in telling the men and women in uniform, the Congress, and the public about the threats we face and the need for a peace through strength defense policy. I have no doubt Mr. Hegseth will excel in a skill in which many of his predecessors have fallen short. Much has been made of both Mr. Hegseth's personal life and some of his policy pronouncements do from time to time. It is noteworthy that the vast majority of the accusations leveled at Mr. Hegseth have come from anonymous sources. Contrast these anonymous accusations with the many public letters of support and commendation. We have seen letters from people who served with his character. These patriotic Americans have been willing to put their names and reputations on the line to support Mr. Hegseth. I look forward to sharing these testimonials with the American people. Let me mention one right now. It comes from David Bellavia, who earned the Medal of Honor for heroic actions in combat in Fallujah, Iraq. David Bellavia writes the following: Pete is fearless, unflappable, and confronts conflicts head-on. He's a leader to the core. When Pete is confirmed as the next Secretary of Defense of the United States of America, this country will finally know the privilege of having a true ambassador able to speak on behalf of this generation and its two-decade global war on terror. Washington doesn't build men like Pete. Combat builds men like Pete. As I said, there are more letters expressing the same endorsement. Today, we'll hear from the nominee directly. I want to thank Mr. Hegseth as well as his loved ones for being here today. I look forward to discussing his nomination. I look forward to hearing from Mr. Hegseth about the ways he hopes to rebuild the American strength that secures the peace. And so now I turn to my friend and colleague, Ranking Member Reed, for his opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to first congratulate you on your chairmanship. I look forward to continuing our committee's strong tradition of bipartisanship and collaboration, and thank you for your thoughtful and conscious. I'd also like to take a moment to join Chairman Wicker in welcoming our new members, Senator Slotkin, Senator Banks, and Senator Sheehy. Welcome. We look forward to working with you. Mr. Hegseth, I welcome you and your family to today's hearing, and I'm also glad to recognize my former colleague, Norm Coleman, and Congressman Mike Waltz. Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Hegseth, I want to begin by saying that I respect and appreciate your military service in the Army National Guard. I know from experience that there is no greater privilege than to lead American soldiers, and I thank you for answering the call. You have been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary is responsible for leading a department of 3.5 million service members and civilians, an annual budget of nearly $900 billion, and hundreds of thousands of aircraft, ships, submarines, combat vehicles, satellites, and the nuclear arsenal. The Secretary also plays a powerful role with our allies, partners, and adversaries abroad. And as we speak, China is seeking to undermine our interests, intimidate our friends, and challenge our standing in the world. Russia's campaign against Ukraine threatens not only Europe, but the entire global order. Ongoing violence in the Middle East has teetered on the edge of all-out war, and the ideologies and actions of violent extremists endanger our citizens, even on our own soil, as the recent tragedy in New Orleans painfully reminds us. These are perilous times, and the position of Secretary of Defense demands a leader of unparalleled experience, wisdom, and above all else, character. The Secretary is expected to be a fair, as well as a trustworthy advocate for the men and women that he leads. Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job. We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war, financial mismanagement, racist and sexist remarks about men and women in uniform, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other troubling issues. I have reviewed many of these allegations and find them extremely alarming. Indeed, the totality of your own writings and alleged conduct would disqualify any service member from holding any leadership position in the military, much less being confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. Nonetheless, I understand that you reject many of these reports as they involve whistleblowers, non-disclosure agreements, and anonymous, although numerous, sources, including those who have faced political intimidation for sharing their experiences. I hope you will address each of these allegations thoroughly and truthfully during your testimony. Just as importantly, I hope you will pledge to a meeting last week. You said that if confirmed, your top priority would be because you believe the U.S. military has been weakened by political correctness. Over the years, you have made clear your opinion of the military's diversity initiatives. As you have said, quote, diversity is not our strength, unity is. And on a recent podcast, you said, quote, I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. When I joined the Army as a young officer in the 1970s, it was rife with racial tension. Women were prohibited from serving in most roles. Gay service members were banned, and we relied on a national draft to fill our ranks. The soldiers I served with were proud to do so, but it was certainly not the nation's most capable military by any standard. We have made great progress since then. Today, the Department of Defense is fully integrated. Every race and religion is accepted. Women serve in all combat roles and leadership positions. Sexual orientation is irrelevant to service, and the all-volunteer force visibly more lethal than it has ever been. This is not a coincidence. Mr. Hegseth, I hope you will explain why you believe such diversity is making the military weak and how you propose to undo that without undermining military leadership and harming readiness, recruitment, and retention. Mr. Hegseth, another reason I'm deeply concerned about your nomination is your disregard for the law of armed conflict and your support for service members who have been convicted of war crimes. You have championed the pardoning of military members who were turned in by their fellow soldiers and SEALs. And let me emphasize that. They weren't discovered by reporters. They were turned in by fellow soldiers and fellow SEALs. And also pardoning of military contractors convicted of killing 14 Iraqi citizens without cause. You have also advocated for the restitution of interrogation methods like waterboarding that have been defined as torture, and you have belittled the advice and counsel of the Judge Advocates General while on deployment. In your book, The War on Warriors, you write, quote, should we follow the Geneva Convention? If our warriors are forced to follow rules arbitrarily and asked to sacrifice more lives so that international tribunals feel better about themselves, aren't we just better off in winning our war? Mr. Hegseth, I would ask that you explain how you, if confirmed, would maintain good order and discipline within our forces and the support of our allies and partners by rejecting international law and the law of war. I'm also concerned about your abilities as a competent manager of organizations far less complex than the Department of Defense. From 2008 to 2010, you led the organization. Veteran expenses far exceeded revenues until the organization teetered on bankruptcy and had to be merged with another group. In fact, according to public reporting, an independent forensic accountant reviewed the organization's finances and discovered evidence of gross financial mismanagement. I would note that this report has not been made available to any government agencies, which is, I think, alarming. But a Republican advisor to you during your tenure at the organization who read the report stated, and I quote, I watched him run an organization very poorly, lose the confidence of donors. The organization ultimately folded and was forced to merge with another organization who individuals felt could run and manage funds on behalf of donors more responsibly than he could. I don't know how he's going to run an organization with an $857 billion budget and 3 million individuals. And that is the only comment we've had and the only access we've had to the forensic report. A similar thing happened with the Concerned Veterans for America, a second veterans group that you led from 2011 until 2016. During those 5 years, tax records show that the organization spent more than it raised. Just as troubling are reports that a significant amount of debt was incurred from social events and parties filled with excessive drinking and questionable personal behavior. Mr. Hegseth, I hope you will explain what actions you will take, if confirmed, to be a better steward of Defense Department's large budget. Finally, while I appreciate our meeting last week, it is unacceptable that you did not meet with any other Democratic members of this committee before this hearing. as has been our bipartisan tradition. During my time in the Senate, I have voted for and worked closely with Secretaries of Defense appointed by Republican presidents. While we may disagree politically, there was always an understanding that rank partisanship should have no place when it comes to providing for the men and women who serve in uniform. And Mr. Hegseth, I am troubled by the many comments you have made both as a commentator and in your published writings. For example, in your book, American Crusade, you wrote, quote, "Modern leftists who represent the soul of the modern Democratic Party literally hate the foundational ideas of They're not esteemed colleagues, nor mere political opponents. We are foes. Either we win or they win. We agree on nothing else." Mr. Hegseth, if confirmed as Secretary of Defense, you would lead an organization that, like the country it represents, is composed of Democrats and Republicans. Yet your language suggests that you regard many of these men and women as foes, and I would ask you to explain why service members and civilians who do not share your political opinions can trust that they will not be targeted during your tenure. Indeed, the challenge of the Secretary of Defense is to remove partisan politics from the military. You propose to inject it. This would be an insult to the men and women who have sworn to uphold their own apolitical duty to the Constitution. Mr. Hegseth, you are the 9th nominee for Secretary of Defense that I've had the honor to consider as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. I have voted in favor of all your predecessors, including those in the first Trump administration. Unfortunately, you lack the character and composure and competence to hold the position of Secretary of Defense. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reed. And now it's my privilege and honor and pleasure to recognize two witnesses who have come forward to introduce our nominee. First, I recognize my former colleague and former Senator Norm of Minnesota for the purpose of an introduction. Norm, we are glad to see you and glad to have you back, and you are recognized.
Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee, my former colleagues, I'm honored to introduce a son of Minnesota to you, Pete Hegseth. As a senator from Minnesota, I spent many hours with this young man as he walked the halls of Congress advocating on behalf of America's veterans. And he is young in the best sense of the word. He is strong, focused, intelligent, incisive, a great listener, and is almost supernaturally energetic, just what we need in a secretary. F. Scott Fitzgerald was a writer in my city of St. Paul, and so the problem with America, Pete was a brave soldier, has been an able communicator, and I believe is about to begin a great second act as our Secretary of Defense. He has struggled and overcome great personal challenges. Please don't give in to the cynical notion that people can't change. We need the ones who can change to lead us, to be beacons of hope, and to remind us that grace can lead us home. 4 years ago, President Biden's nominee, Lloyd Austin, a good and honorable man, received 97 votes on the floor of the Senate. And we went through the debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal. Putin invaded Ukraine. The Houthis endanger our shipping lanes. We witnessed Israeli miracles against America's enemies in the Middle East, where the United States was more of an impediment than a help. Our recruitment numbers have sunk dramatically, and our southern border has suffered a slow but dangerous invasion. Yes, Pete Hegseth is an out-of-the-box nominee, and I say it's high time to get out of the box. One more thought. The country longs for a government of less division and more respect and dignity. My hope is that this committee hearing provides what they are asking for. Disagree? Yes. Strongly if necessary. But then come together to support Hegseth of the one president we have at a time, laying aside partisan politics for the essential mission of national security upon which everything else depends. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Norm. I do appreciate that and appreciate your presence today. I now have the honor and pleasure of introducing Congressman, a member of the House, for another day or two.
Another day or two.
Okay, and I now recognize Congressman Walz for whatever opening statement and introduction he might make.
Well, Thank you, Chairman Wicker, and Chairman has a very nice ring to it, so congratulations, Ranking Member Reed, distinguished members of this committee. It is a privilege to appear before you today and urge the members of this committee to confirm Pete Hegseth as our next Secretary of Defense. And I'm not here today just to advocate on behalf of a future colleague, but to speak on behalf of someone I consider a dear friend for over a decade now. Like Pete, I served in the U.S. Army. Like Pete, I'm a veteran. We deployed to Afghanistan and all over the world at the height of the war on terror, which is the war of our generation. And like thousands of other warfighters, we've witnessed the hardships of war. We've experienced time away from family and friends, and no one, I can promise you this, no one hates war more than those who have had to go fight it. No one does. Pete's story, though, isn't that much different from the millions of other veterans, and they know it, and they appreciate him for the experiences that he's gone through. And after our country was brutally attacked on 9/11, Pete Hegseth answered the call of duty like so many others. He put the interests of this country ahead of his own. And I can tell you firsthand, as can the heroes sitting in this audience, of country, his selflessness, his duty. These are the key tenets that have shaped him into the leader that he is today. These are the traits. He will bring the perspective of being the first Secretary of Defense to have served as a junior officer on the front lines, not in the headquarters, on the front lines, in policy drift that was discussed often in this very room that led us to decades of war. So not only does he understand the threats he faces, but as the chairman mentioned, he is brilliant, in my mind, at communicating those to the American people in a way that is often not communicated in Washington, D.C., to reach out to the American people so that they understand why the military needs to do what it needs to do. And look, I have no doubt that he is going to get the Pentagon back to its primary mission, lethal readiness. That warrior ethos is what our enemies will respect. That warrior ethos is what our enemies will fear, and it's that warrior ethos that will keep the peace. And so, look, ladies and gentlemen, in my humble opinion, our military deserves better than it's getting. Our country faces a devastating recruitment crisis. Men and women are not volunteering to serve at the levels required. Our readiness is down. Our costs are up. And it seems like nearly every major weapon system, again, often discussed in this very room, is costing too much, delivering too little, and taking way too long. The bottom line is the status quo is unacceptable. It's not working. And the members of this committee, you all know it. You know it's not working. And the members of the House Armed Services know it's not working. And we have hearing after hearing, year after year. And here we are decades later describing the same problems. The Pentagon has continuously failed audits. The businesses that want to do business with the Pentagon have to pass an audit, but the entity itself fails an audit. Innovation is stalled, morale is down, standards have been weakened, and meritocracy is less valued. And as a result, militaries have been emboldened all over the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for change. It is time for change. You all have literally seen thousands of veterans, as the chairman cited one amazing Medal of Honor recipient. But we have seen thousands of veterans expressing their support for Pete. This is a man who can reinvigorate that warrior ethos, and this is a man that will lead. I can't imagine having a more capable partner in my position as National Security Advisor. Pete is a man of family, of faith, and he's committed to making our country strong again. And most importantly, and brother, I know this in my core, he will always have as a first principle the service members that are out there on the front lines for all. Critical that President Trump has his national security team in place for the challenges ahead, and I thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for your testimony, and I'm guessing that each and every member of this committee on speed dial for the next few years. So thank you. Our two guests may stay, or I know they have other engagements and responsibilities also, but thank you both for your testimony. At this point, Mr. Hegseth, I'm required to ask you as a nominee a series of questions that the committee asks all civilian or negative to each question. Have you adhered to applicable laws and regulations governing conflicts of interest?
Yes, sir.
Have you assumed any duties or taken any actions that would appear to
Sir.
exercising our legislative and oversight testimony, briefings, reports, records, and other information from the executive branch on it, and testify before this committee when requested?
Yes, sir.
Do you agree to provide records, documents, and electronic communications in a timely manner when requested by this committee, its subcommittees, or other appropriate committees of Congress, and to consult with the requester regarding the basis for any good faith delay or denial in providing such records?
Yes, sir.
Will you ensure that your staff complies with deadlines established by this committee for the production of reports, records, and other information, including timely responding to hearing questions for the record?
Yes, sir.
Will you cooperate in providing witnesses and briefers in response to congressional requests?
Yes, sir.
Will those witnesses and briefers be protected from reprisal for their testimony or briefings?
Yes, sir.
All right. So at this point, Mr. Hegseth, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed, and all the members of this committee for this opportunity today. I'm grateful for and have learned a great deal from this advise and consent process. Our founders knew what they were doing. Should I be confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee, senators from both parties, to secure our nation. I want to thank the former senator from Minnesota, Norm Coleman, for his mentorship and friendship in this process, and the incoming National Security Advisor, Congressman, and more importantly for our purposes, Colonel Jennifer, who has changed my life and been with me throughout this entire process. I love you, sweetheart, and I thank God for you. And as Jenny and I pray together every morning, all glory, regardless of the outcome, belongs to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. His grace and mercy abounds each day. May his will be done. Our entire family, including our 7 wonderful kids, Gunnar, Jackson, Peter Boone, Kensington, Luke, Rex, sorry, it's a lot of them, and Gwendolyn. Their future safety and security. Berets, soldiers, pilots, sailors, Marines, Gold Stars, and more. Too many friends to name. Officers, enlisted, black and white, young and old, men and women, all Americans, all warriors. This hearing is for you. Thank you for figuratively and literally having my back.
Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist, and you support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities for their swift reaction to that outburst and state that similar interruptions will be treated in like manner. Mr. Hegseth, you may continue.
Well, as I'll say again, thank you for figuratively and literally having my back. I pledge to do the same for all of you. It's an honor to come before this committee today as President Donald Trump's nominee for the office of Secretary of Defense. 77 million Americans gave President Trump a powerful mandate for change, to put America first, at home and abroad. I want to thank President Trump for his faith in me and his selfless leadership for our republic. The troops have no better commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. As I've said to many of you in private meetings, when President Trump chose me for this position, the primary charge he gave me was to bring the warrior culture back to the Department of Defense. He, like me, wants a Pentagon laser-focused on lethality, meritocracy, warfighting, accountability, and readiness.
You may continue, sir.
Returning the Pentagon back to warfighting, that's it. That's my job.
Mr. Hegseth, suspend your remarks. Let me just say this. The Capitol Police are going to remove immediately individuals that are disrupting the hearing. I see a pattern attempted to be inflicted on the committee, and we're simply not going to tolerate that. You may proceed.
To bring back warfighting, if confirmed, I'm going to work with President Trump and this committee to, one, restore the warrior ethos to the Pentagon and throughout our fighting force. In doing so, we will reestablish trust in our military, addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members. Mr. Hegseth, you may.
The strength of our military is our unity and our shared purpose, not our differences. Number two, we're going to rebuild defense industrial base, reforming the acquisitions process. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, no more valley of death for new defense companies, modernizing our nuclear triad, ensuring the Pentagon can pass an audit, and rapidly fielding emerging technologies. And number three, we're going to reestablish deterrence. First and foremost, we will defend our homeland, our borders, and our skies. Second, we will work with our partners and allies to deter aggression in the Indo-Pacific from the Communist Chinese. And finally, we will responsibly end wars to ensure that we prioritize our resources to reorient to larger threats. We can no longer count on reputational deterrence. We need real deterrence. The Department of Defense under Donald Trump will achieve peace through strength. And in pursuing these America First national security goals, will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. Unlike the current administration, politics should play no part in military matters. We are not Republicans. We are not Democrats. We are American warriors. Our standards will be high and they will be equal, not equitable. That's a very different word. We need to make sure every warrior is fully qualified on their assigned weapon system, every pilot's fully qualified and current on the aircraft they are flying, and every general or flag officer is selected for leadership or promotion purely based on performance, readiness, and merit. Leaders at all levels will be held accountable, and warfighting and lethality and the readiness of the troops and their families will be our only focus. This has been my focus ever since I first put on the uniform as a young Army ROTC cadet at Princeton University in 2001. I joined the military because I love my country and felt an obligation to defend it. I served with incredible Americans in Guantanamo Bay, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and on the streets of Washington, D.C., many of which are with me here today. This includes enlisted soldiers I helped become American citizens, and Muslim allies I helped immigrate from Iraq and Afghanistan. Because when I took off the uniform, my mission never stopped. Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials. Has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring of my generation. I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled a trigger downrange, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevac, dead bodies, and knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now. Ask anyone who's ever worked for me or with me. I know what I don't know. My success as a leader, and I very much look forward to discussing my organization's successes at Vets for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America. I'm incredibly proud of the work that we've done. But my success as a leader has always been setting a clear vision, hiring people smarter and more capable than me, empowering them to succeed, work the plan, and then work harder than everyone else around you. I've sworn an oath to the Constitution before, and if confirmed, I will proudly do it again. This time, for the most important deployment of my life. I pledge to be a faithful partner to this committee, taking input and respecting oversight. We share the same goals: a ready, lethal military, the health and well-being of our troops, and a strong and secure America. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hegseth. Before we begin with member questions, I would like to remind my colleagues that, consistent with the bipartisan staff agreement from December, and in concert with exactly how this committee dealt with the last Secretary will be recognized for one round of 7 minutes to question the nominee. Out of respect for the time of all members of this committee, the time limits will be tightly enforced. We've now been here 45 minutes, and I think we've done very well with the time. But at this point, I will begin my questioning of the nominee. Mr. Hegseth, you and your family have endured criticism of your nomination since it was announced in November. Let's get into this allegation about sexual assault, inappropriate workplace behavior, alcohol abuse, and financial mismanagement during your time as a nonprofit executive. I should note that the majority of these have come from anonymous sources in liberal media publications. But I want to give you an opportunity to respond to these allegations, sir.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for that opportunity. You are correct. We undertook this responsibility with an obligation to the troops to do right by them for our warfighters. And what became very evident to us from the beginning, there was a coordinated smear campaign orchestrated in the media against us. That was clear from moment one. And what we knew is that it wasn't about me. Most of it was about President Donald Trump, who's had to endure the very same thing for much longer amounts of time. And he endured it in incredibly strong ways. So we, in some ways, knew it was coming. We didn't understand the depth of the dishonesty that would come with it. So from story after story in the media, left-wing media, we saw anonymous source after anonymous source based on second or third-hand accounts. And time again, stories would come out, and people would reach out to me and say, you know, I've spoken to this reporter about who you really are, and I was willing to go on the record. But they didn't print my quote. They didn't print any of my quotes. Or, I've worked with you for 10 years, or I was your accountant, or I was your chief operating officer, or I was your board member, or I was with you on 100 different tour stops for Concerned Veterans for America. No one called me. No one asked about your conduct on the record or off the record. Instead, a small handful of anonymous sources were allowed to drive a smear campaign, an agenda about me, because our left-wing media in America today, sadly, doesn't care about the truth. All they were out to do, Mr. Chairman, was to destroy me. And why do they want to destroy me? Because I'm a change agent and a threat to them, because Donald Trump was willing to choose me, to empower me, to bring the Defense Department back to what it really should be, which is warfighting. So I'm willing to endure these attacks. But what I will do is stand up for the truth and for my reputation. False attacks, anonymous attacks, repeated ad nauseum, printed as nauseum, as facts. We have provided to on-the-record statement after on-the-record statement from people who have served with me, worked with me at Fox News, Concerned Vets, Vets for Freedom, you name it, from the top of the chain to the bottom, who will say, I treat them with respect, with kindness, with dignity. That's men, that's women, that's black, that's white, that's every background. I have prided myself as a leader of respecting people, being professional. That is the balance of mine. I'm not a perfect person, as has been acknowledged. Saved by the grace of God, by Jesus and Jenny. I'm not a perfect person, but redemption is real. And God forged me in ways that I know I'm prepared for. On behalf of the warfighters.
Thank you, Mr. Hegseth. And frankly, I'm sure there are millions of Americans watching who would agree that they've experienced that same sort of redemption. So I do appreciate that. I realize that it involves a little bearing of the soul, but thank you for that. Now let's talk about top-line defense spending. I have a plan. I think you've read it. I've issued a forge, which you've also had a chance to look at. And you have noted correctly that the current trend line of defense spending falling below 3% of our GDP is a threat to national security. Military in the world must be done responsibly, but it cannot be done on the cheap. You still agree with that, do you not?
Yes, sir, I do.
Tell us what you think about, particularly about my plan to make the Defense Department less bureaucratic, less top-heavy, cut out some of the bureaucracy and layers, make it more friendly to startups and to new ideas, contained in my 20 or so page white paper, Defending Freedom's Forge.
Senator, I've had a chance to review the Forged Act, that paper. Those are precisely the kinds of ideas that need to be pursued. And I look forward to working with this committee to ensure we cut the red tape, we incentivize innovation, we rebuild the defense industrial base, cut out the bureaucracy, all the things that are preventing the platforms and the tools from getting rapidly from our great defense companies here that should, and those that want to compete, into the hands of warfighters. But past his prologue on this, sir, and I would just look at what President Trump did after the drawdowns of lead from behind under President Obama. President Trump rebuilt our military. He didn't start wars, he ended them, and he didn't allow wars to start on his watch. We've had the same kind of defense cuts under the Biden administration. And so, look, I would present of President Donald Trump and me coming alongside him to ensure we have peace through strength by rebuilding our military, investing as necessary. Going under 3%, Mr. Chairman, is very dangerous.
Okay, we've got 45 seconds. Tell us, in that point, get us started at least talking about deterring China and the Indo-Pacific.
It starts with priorities. The 2017 National Defense Strategy was the first step in reorienting away from simply entanglement in the Middle East, which our generation knows a lot about, and reorienting the behemoth that is the Pentagon toward new priorities, specifically the Indo-Pacific. So that strategy has started and was barely followed through on under the Biden administration. So we're going to start by ensuring the institution understands that as far as threats abroad, the CCP is front and center, also obviously defending our homeland as well.
Thank you very much, Senator Reed. You're recognized.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questioning, I would like to make 3 requests. First, many of my members would like a second round. That has been the custom. Senator Hagel was afforded 3 rounds. Senator Ash Carter, 2 rounds. and that was done by a Republican chairman with the consent and the appropriate guidance of Democrats. I must say, too, my recollection is I've never denied anyone the opportunity to ask the second round of questions as I chaired. I would request the second round. And my time is running. I think these are administrative.
Oh, yeah, you're using your time. No, if the timekeeper will pause the time. I must say, I think we're going to have adequate time for questioning. And I know Democrat members have coordinated their questions as much as we have. And we are following the same exact precedent on all things that we did with Secretary Austin. So I respectfully understand what you're saying, but I think we have an agreement. It's been known for quite some time, and I intend to stick with that agreement which we made last December. What is your second request?
Second, as been publicly reported, you and I have both seen the FBI background investigation of Mr. Hegseth. And I want to state for the record, I believe the investigation was insufficient, frankly. There are still FBI obligations to talk to people. They have not had access to the forensic audit, which I referenced to, and the person who had access to was quite critical of Mr. Hegseth. And I think people on both sides have suggested that they get the report. I know your colleagues have asked for it. Senator Thune assured me personally that he thought it was an appropriate idea. So I would ask, and I would say too, as a precedent, one of President Trump's appointees had similar very complicated personal issues. The report was made available to all the members of the committee. We would be following precedent. I ask that that be made possible.
Again, there's been much discussion about this. And what I intend to do is follow the exact precedent that we've had for the last two hearings with regard to secretaries of defense. Not only Secretary Austin, but Secretary Mattis 8 years ago. And that was for the chair and the ranking member to see the report. And so that is my intention as chair of this committee.
Finally, Mr. Chairman, I have several letters that I would include for the record. One from Count Every Hero, which is an organization of retired four-star generals and former secretaries of defense that is critical of the proposed purge panels. One from an organization for domestic violence. One for a Council on American Relations. And also several letters that raise questions. I would ask they be submitted for the record.
Without objection, they will be submitted. And Mr. Reed, your time has now expired. Just kidding. Yeah. You're recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you. You're a very understanding chairman. I like that. I like that. Ms. Hegseth, you've written, and it's quote, "Oh yeah, and fire any general who hasn't carried water for Obama and Biden's extra constitution and agenda-driven transformation for our military. Clean house and start over." It's come to my attention that current serving military personnel have received emails threatening them with being fired for supporting the current DOD policies. One mail that was sent to a military officer with the subject line, "Clean house," reminiscent of your specific comment, states, and I quote, "With the incoming administration looking to remove disloyal, corrupt, traitorous, liberal officers such as yourself, we will certainly be putting your name into the list of those personnel to be removed. We know you support the woke DEI policies and will ensure you never again influence anyone in the future. You and the redacted spouse's name will be lucky if you're able to collect your military requirement," end quote. Now, I want to remind everyone that these policies that are being referred to date back decades, to the 1940s and 50s with respect to racial discrimination particularly, and in enforced. Mr. Hegseth, are you aware of these emails being sent to officers?
Senator, you mentioned the word accountability, which is something we have not had for the last 4 years.
Are you aware of these messages being sent to officers?
Certainly, I'm not aware of that. It's not one of my efforts, but there's been no accountability for
Excuse
the
me.
disaster of the withdrawal in Afghanistan. And that's precisely why we're here today.
Excuse me.
Is that leadership has
No.
been unwilling to take accountability. It's the time to restore that to our most senior ranks.
You've written publicly that DI policy is a distraction and have military personnel walking on eggshells. Do you believe that emails like that are essentially threatening both a serving officer and a spouse and claiming that they'll lose their pension will have a distraction and detract from the lethality?
Senator, you mentioned the 40s and 50s, and you're precisely right. The military was a forerunner in courageous racial integration in ways no other institutions were willing to do. I served with men and women of all backgrounds. It's
Mr.
incredibly
Hegseth,
important.
please, do you mean-
However,
please,
the
do you-
DEI policies of today are not the same as what happened back then. They're dividing troops inside formations, causing commanders to walk on eggshells, not putting meritocracy first. That's the indictment that's made by those serving right now.
Excuse me.
And why we're having this
Excuse me.
conversation.
All of your public comments don't talk about meritocracy. They talk about liberal democratic efforts that are destroying the military, that those people are our enemies. That's not meritocracy. That's a political view. And your goal, as I see emerging, is to politicize the military in favor of your particular positions, which you've outlined extensively, which would be the worst blow to the professionalism of the United States military, and would, under receiving these emails, beginning to wonder very seriously if they should continue. Let me change subject for a moment here. In at least two of these cases, the military personnel who served in combat with these convicted service members were not supportive of the pardons. They did their duty as soldiers to report war crimes. Your definition of lethality seems to embrace those people who do commit war crimes, rather than those who stand up and say, this is not right. So what's the response to your service members who personally witnessed these and courageously reported them to their superiors?
Senator, as someone who's led men in combat directly and had to make very difficult decisions, I've thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality, ensuring that the men and women on the front lines have the opportunity to destroy with and close the enemy, and that lawyers aren't the ones getting in the way. I'm not talking about disavowing the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sir, I'm talking about restrictive rules of engagement that these men and women behind me understand they've lived with on the battlefield, which has made it more difficult to defeat our enemies. In many of the cases you're talking about in particular, sir, there was evidence withheld, there was prosecutorial misconduct, and as someone who looks case by case and defaults to the warfighter, to the men and women with dust on their boots, not the to understand those cases and ensure that our warriors are always looked out for.
Those cases were adjudicated by who? People in Washington or fellow non-commissioned officers who had also served, sacrificed, and believed in the ethic of the military? Who were the court-martial?
Senator, in multiple cases, they were actually acquitted,
In
but
some
charges
cases,
lingered.
yes,
Regardless
but
of where those
some were
convening
committed.
authorities were, yes, sir.
Some were, but others were convicted, and you asked for pardon. That's the only reason you asked for pardon, because they were convicted. But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention, the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir,
Why not?
because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be oceans, their medals.
Senator Reed.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Hegseth, to you and to your family. Thank you for the meeting that we had. We talked about a number of things. First and foremost was that nuclear weapons are foundational to our national defense, and having a safe, effective, and credible nuclear deterrent underpins our alliances, and as you know, it deters our adversaries. Nuclear deterrence has been, and you and I believe, agreed on this, it must continue to be unequivocally the highest priority mission of the Department of Defense. But deterrence only works if our adversaries believe our nuclear forces are effective and credible. All three legs of our triad are undergoing that generational recapitalization programs, and we cannot afford any more delays in those programs. Sir, do you believe and agree with President Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review that preventing adversary nuclear attacks is, quote, the highest priority of the United States?
Senator, yes, I do.
Confirmed, will you commit to supporting all three legs of the nuclear triad and to using every tool available to deliver these systems on schedule?
Senator, yes, I do, because ultimately our deterrence, our survival is reliant upon the capability, the perception, and the reality of the.
While former secretaries of defense have stated that nuclear deterrence is the highest priority, we haven't really seen that translated into budget requests or using the tools like the Defense Production Act. You've spoken about increasing lethality. You've spoken about getting programs done faster. How would you actually implement a culture change so that we can see these delivery schedules move forward, be rewarded? I can tell you in most every briefing we have, the schedules we're on are too late. So what would you do?
Well, ultimately focused first on the things that are most important, as we have discussed, Senator, the nuclear triad, understanding whether it's the B-21 or the Minuteman to the Sentinel, all aspects, or the Columbia-class submarines, ballistic missiles. What are the priorities that need to be focused on? And in those particular cases, you mentioned it, Senator, the Defense Production Act, emergency powers. If we're at a place where our nuclear capabilities are perceived to not be what they are, that is an emergency. And we have an ally in our income. These things understands the power and strength of nuclear deterrence, will not allow them
It's the
to be
existential
deprioritized.
threat. It's the existential threat to this nation. How do you change the culture? It's not just the Production Act that's going to be able to do it. How are you going to move forward faster?
Competition, Senator, is important, critically important. The Death Valley that was talked about, leveraging the innovation of Silicon Valley, which for the first time in generations has shown a willingness, desire, and capability to bring its best technologies to bear at the Pentagon, a Pentagon that has become too insular, tries to block new technologies from coming in. So we have to embrace that, there's some great Office of Strategic Capital, DIU initiatives that provide loans to companies to participate, because you have to invest in the defense industrial base for the longer term projects. We have the capability, the missiles and the munitions, but also to rapidly field emerging technologies that we need on the battlefield right now. So as we learn things, say in the war in Ukraine, those technologies, as we look at threats we're going to face, find ways to rapidly field those using off-the-shelf technologies or standard designs, modular designs. Another easy one, Senator, that became evident in the process is digital designs. The Pentagon often builds entire systems without first using a digital design.
Okay.
Which means you build prototypes and then scrap them and start over again. No private sector business could survive doing business that way. So there's a lot of innovation, and I'm going to hire a lot of smart.
The 2025 NDAA, it was established to a new position, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Nuclear Deterrence, Chemical and Biological Defense Policy and Programs. And that was established so we could cut through a lot of the bureaucratic stovepipes that we see in the office of the Secretary of Defense. If confirmed, will you direct the Department of Defense components to expeditiously implement this reform?
It sounds, I would want to look directly
is
at
great.
exactly what that reform is.
It is
I
great.
take your word that it's great, Senator. I will review it robustly, and I look forward to implementing it.
Okay, thank you. During the first Trump administration, the 2018 U.S. needed to once again develop and deploy a nuclear-armed sea-launched cruise missile known as SLICM to offset significant Russian and Chinese advantages in theater-range nuclear capabilities. Since then, Congress, on a strong bipartisan basis, has directed the Navy and the National Nuclear Security Administration to continue this effort. Do you support the SLICM program?
As of right now, Senator, based on what I know, I do. But one of my answers I'll have repeatedly throughout this morning is getting an opportunity to look under the hood, classified material, get an understanding of true capabilities vis-a-vis enemy capabilities. Because what we know right now on the nuclear, sorry, Senator, what I know on the nuclear side is that Russia and China are rushing to modernize and build our. We need to match threats to capabilities, and the systems we elevate will be tied to whether those capabilities are needed based on the adversaries we face. Yes, ma'am.
Would you ensure that this program is executed according to law?
Absolutely, absolutely, Senator.
What short is in this country?
Needs to be real short.
Real short.
Serious investment targeted at systems that we truly need by also incentivizing competition and focus from the OSD, from the Office of Secretary of Defense, to all the particular strategic initiatives to revive them so it's not just one system, it's multiple systems.
You may want to expand on that on the record. At this point, my colleagues, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter organized by a group called Flag Officers for America, which has 120 retired generals and admirals offering their support for Mr. Hegseth's nomination. I ask unanimous consent. Without objection, it is entered into the record. Senator Shaheen.
Good morning, Mr. Hegseth.
Good morning, Senator.
I was pleased when I was contacted on your behalf about meeting before this hearing. I've been on this committee since 2000, my Democratic colleagues on this committee before the hearing. So, as you can imagine, I was disappointed when no one ever followed up. When we followed up with your office, you were not able to meet. That you will have a responsibility to meet with all members of this committee, not just Republicans?
Senator, I very much appreciate and understand the traditionally bipartisan nature of this committee. Their national defense is not partisan. It should not be about Republicans or Democrats. And so
Thank
I
you.
look forward to working together with you and your colleagues on priorities facing this nation. Yes.
I think we would expect that. And one reason that I wanted to meet with you in the military, because you've made a number of surprising statements about women serving in the military. As recently as November the 7th of 2024 on the Sean Ryan Show, you said, and I quote, "I'm straight up saying that we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective." The quote went on a little longer, but that was the gist of it. That was before you were nominated to be Secretary of Defense. Mr. Hegseth, do you know what percentage of our military is comprised of women?
I believe it's 18 to 20%, Senator.
It's almost 18%, and in fact, separations. So they make up a critical part of our military, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am. Women in our military, as I have said publicly, have and continue to make amazing contributions across all aspects of our battlefield.
Well, you also write in your book, The War on Warriors, with the chapter, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, that, quote, "Not only are women comparatively less effective than men in combat roles, but they are more likely to be objectified by the enemy and their own nation in the moral realms of war." Mr. Hegseth, should we take it to believe that you believe that the two women on this committee who have served honorably and with distinction made our military less effective and less capable?
I'm incredibly grateful for the two women who've served our military in uniform and including contributions on the battlefield. indispensable contribution. Senator, I would like to clarify, when I'm talking capabilities of men and women, it's about standards. And this
Well-
committee has talked a lot about standards. Standards that we, unfortunately, over time, have seen eroded in certain duty positions, certain schools, certain places, which affects readiness, which is what I care about the most, readiness
I
on the
appreciate
battlefield.
that, and-
so my
but
comments point
however-
time and time again to standards.
Your statements publicly have not been to that effect. After your nomination, you did state to a group of reporters that you, quote, support all women serving in our military today who do a fantastic job across the globe, including combat. So what I'm confused about, Mr. Hegseth, is which is it? Why should women in our military, if you were the Secretary of Defense, believe that they would have a fair shot and an equal opportunity to rise through the ranks? If on the one hand, you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective, and on the other hand, you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military. What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us, and you will be treated fairly and with dignity, honor, and respect, just like every man and woman in uniform, just like the men and women that I've worked with in my veterans organizations, to include when I was a headquarters and headquarters company commander in the Minnesota National Guard.
Well,
and
I
we had women in
appreciate
our
your
ranks as
11th
well.
hour conversion. But, Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to submit Chapter 5, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, for the record. Mr. Hegseth,
But without objection, it will be submitted. and
are you
accepted.
familiar with the Women, Peace, and Security agenda at the Department of Defense?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
This is a law that was signed during President-elect Trump's first term. It was legislation that I sponsored with Republican Senator Capito of West Virginia. It was co-sponsored by Marco Rubio, the nominee to be the President-elect's Secretary of State. It was led in the House of Representatives by Kristi Noem, the President-elect's nominee to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. It mandates that women be included in all aspects of our national security, including conflict resolution and peace negotiations. And at the Department of Defense, it has been the law for 8 years under both the Trump and Biden administrations. The DoD has incorporated women throughout its decision-making as a result. Every single combatant commander across 2 administrations has told this committee that this law and its implementation at the Department of Defense provides them a strategic advantage operationally. Based on your comments, it appears that the example that you would like to set, not only for women in this country, but for women across the globe, 50% of the world's population, as the prospective nominee to lead the most combat-credible military in the entire world, is that women should not have an equal opportunity in our military. So will you commit to preserving the Women, Peace, and Security law at DoD and including in your budget the requisite funding to continue to restore and resource these programs throughout the DoD?
Senator, I will commit to reviewing that program and ensuring it aligns with America First national security priorities, meritocracy, lethality, and readiness. And if it advances America...
President Trump signed the law. I hope that...
To Senator Shaheen, at this point, I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 5 letters of support from female service members and combat veterans who support Mr. Hegseth's nomination. These women represent diverse viewpoints, from a retired colonel with over 25 years of service to an active duty Navy surface warfare commander to a senior airman. They support Mr. training status and the warrior ethos. So without, and now I'm honored to recognize Senator Cotton for 7 minutes.
Mr. Hegseth, let's continue on this line of questioning about what's sometimes referred to as women in combat. I think that phrase is something of a misnomer. Many members of this committee have served in combat in the last 25 years, to include women and men. I'm sure all those men served with women. whether they were military police officers or they were pilots or whether they were intelligence analysts or medics or what have you. You served. I assume you served with women who were on the front lines as well. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And were those women anything other than skilled, brave, and honorable in their service?
They were some of the best soldiers I worked with.
So women have been serving in combat for a long time. Women have even been serving in combat units like infantry battalions for a long time in roles like medics or mechanics or what have you. So what we're talking about here specifically is women in ground combat roles in jobs like infantrymen or artillerymen or special forces. Now, until about 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. Under Secretary Panetta, those roles were opened up to women to serve in. Has President Trump indicated at all that he plans to rescind or alter that guidance?
You're correct to point out, Senator, that these are the decisions that the Commander-in-Chief will have the prerogative to make. He has not indicated to me that he has plans to change whether or not women would have access to these roles. However, I would point out, ensuring that standards are equal and high is of importance to him and great importance to me. Because in those ground combat roles, what is true is that the weight of the ruck on your back doesn't change. The weight of the 155 round that you have to carry doesn't change. The weight of the 240 Bravo machine gun you might have to carry doesn't change. And so whether it's a man or a woman, they have to meet the same high standards. And Senator, in any place where those things have been eroded or in courses, criteria have been changed in order to meet quotas, racial quotas or gender quotas, so that's the kind of review I'm talking about, not whether women have access to ground combat.
Okay, so thank you. So you expect no change to that guidance, but as you point out, in these specific jobs, there are irreducible physical demands. We expect our intelligence analysts and our mechanics to be physically fit in the military, but it's different when you're in the infantry or the artillery. You just mentioned a few things. Let me point it out. An artillery shell weighs almost 100 pounds. An Abrams tank round weighs around 50 pounds. The M240 Bravo machine gun with its tripod weighs almost 50 pounds. The average weight of a full kit, ammo, water, commo, body armor for a soldier is over 100 pounds. Nothing you can do can change any of those things, right? That is physical reality.
Go ahead. Yes, Senator. And I would say the requirements to handle those things in a ground combat unit, as far as standards, can look different than those of a medic or a drone pilot. And so it's not that it has to be the same standard throughout, it's standards to maximize efficacy of that particular position.
Let me read a quote here from one Army officer. While it may be difficult for a 120-pound woman to lift or drag 250 pounds, the Army cannot artificially absolve women of that responsibility. It may still exist on the battlefield. The entire purpose of creating a gender-neutral test was to acknowledge the reality that each job has objective physical standards to which all soldiers should be held, regardless of gender. The intent was not to ensure that women and men will have an equal likelihood of meeting those standards. I assume, based on your testimony, you agree with that Army officer?
Absolutely. The standards need to be the same and they need to be high. And they need to be set by the people closest to the problem set, closest to the understanding of what is required by that job. Commanders, commanding officers, and COCOMs and elsewhere who understand the reality of what they face, that's the feedback we should get. That's what should be enshrined and enforced, and no other set of political prerogatives. When I talk about removing politics, ideological or political prerogatives should contribute to those determinations, nothing other than the execution of the mission.
Thank you. For the record, that Army officer was Captain Kristen Griest, the Army's first female infantry officer and one of its first female Ranger School graduates.